Welcome to this edition of Michael's Weekly Perspective Podcast. This is podcast episode 42. In this podcast, we will be hearing from three guests regard to COVID-19 and how it influenced them both positive and negative ways. That's all for this edition, and stay tuned. Hello and welcome to this edition of Michael's Weekly Perspective Podcast. This is podcast episode 42. In this podcast, we will hear from three guests regard to COVID-19 and how had it influenced them both positive and negative ways. Just to let you listeners know that I'm now back to my room where I used to record my podcast, and the published time for this podcast is being changed back to every Sunday at 4:30 p.m. To get hold of this podcast, you can either choose to call using the listener line, or you can send an email to me. The phone number to call in to this podcast is 404-923-0115. That's 404-923-0115. You can also send an email to me. That email address is munnmichael68@gmail.com. That's munnmichael68@gmail.com. I'm out of school for summer break, and the school won't start until August 9th. Before we hear from the three guests, let us pause for a promotion break.
Careful, careful. There's a window there. Careful.
Where's the window? We need to get up to the top of the mountain towers, for goodness sake.
Oh, there's a door. There's a door. Go on, quick.
Oh, God.
Oh,
Look.
my God.
Stuart, we're in.
There's a Braille Note M-Power and a Packmate Omni over here. I'm taking that Packmate.
You look for a record player.
William Shatner's greatest hits. Throw that out the window, will you? Right, here we go.
Hello, we're the Blind Guys Chat.
And if you want an hour of fun chat and sometimes ridiculous conversation once every 2 weeks, then give us a listen.
Remember, Blind Guys Chat, wherever you get your podcasts.
Oh, quick, I hear somebody. Let's leg it.
Oh, where's my cane?
This podcast is being hosted by Oren O'Neill, along with two other guys from Netherlands and Ireland. This is a great podcast, and I suggest you, listeners, to take a listen to this podcast. For today's podcast, I have three guests join me. They are Aaron Richmond. Aaron, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Elana Charles from Wisconsin.
Thanks, Michael.
And Windy from Ontario, Canada.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
When we speak, we will go by alphabetical orders. A comes before E, and then E comes before W. We go by first names. Before we begin, I wonder, would you like to tell my listeners some brief bios about yourself?
Yes. Hey, everybody. Aaron Richmond from the Aaron's Opinion 2 podcast, from Anchor or anywhere you get a podcast. My background is in the field of international relations. My day job is I'm an English teacher. I work online teaching English. My hobby is I'm a podcaster, podcasting about critical issues in the blindness community. 1240-681-9869, Aaron's Opinion 6@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. For those of listeners who's been listening to this podcast ever since I first started last year, you probably remember this voice.
Hello, everyone. It's Elana here, and I have a podcast myself called Through the Eyes of Elana, which you can find anywhere and everywhere, including Anchor, Apple Podcasts. I serve as secretary of my state student division, which is the Wisconsin Association of Blind Students, and I also serve as chapter secretary of my local NFB chapter. A couple of my hobbies are singing in virtual choirs and audio editing.
Very nice. I met Elana during NFB convention at that point. It was still virtual. Thank you, Elana. Windy, would you mind brag yourself real quick?
I'm Windy Jarvis, and I'm a special education teacher. I'm in my last year. After 32 years, I'm going to retire. I have a book out called Be a Duck, and I also have a podcast called Thinking Out Loud, which is on all the platforms. I'm so happy to be here.
Very nice. All four of us have something in common. We produce content for listeners to hear. So the next question that I'm asking is, where do you see yourself 5 or 10 years from now?
Thank you for asking me, because I wanted to bring this matter up, actually. One of the goals that I want to accomplish as a podcaster and as a teacher, I always do my best to do it. I really mean this, guys. I really want to help as many people in real life as possible. I'm not just saying that in a podcast. I really mean it. As a teacher, I work very hard. As a podcaster, I work extremely hard to produce content that you guys love and that helps other people who are blind, who are sighted from all over the world. And so one of the projects that I would love to be able to do is to find some way to expand upon my podcast where, I don't know, I have some sort of a network, some sort of a station, some sort of a something or an other, a something or other that involves doing the right thing, enjoying, loving podcasting and content creation, and continuing to help other people. Of course, maybe, who knows, maybe 5 or 10 years from now, I'll own a business or do those types of things. But I'll definitely love podcasting for you guys. No question there. Great question, by the way.
Very nice.
Well, I see myself in 5 to 10 years, graduated from college with a degree of elementary education and making a big impact in children's lives in the classroom as a teacher.
Those two goals from Aaron and Elena are both very ambitious. Good luck. What about you, Wendy? What do you see yourself from 5 or 10 years?
Well, in 5 years, I will be retired, but I'm hoping to still be involved with the special education community that I've come to help over the years. I hope to be writing and have my second book published, still doing podcasting, and finding a way to mix all of that in with still time to relax and sip coffee on the deck all morning long.
That's a very good goal. I wish I can do that, but wish is wish. What I would see myself doing 5 years from now is I probably graduated from at least 4-year college and in the process of getting into law school. Of course, now I am 21. By the time I am 31, which is 10 years from now, I probably graduated from law school in Georgetown and served as a disability attorney within the United States. Very nice. Those 3 contributions are achievable. Who are the 3 peoples that have influenced the 3 of you?
My parents and my former teacher of the visually impaired. We'll use her initials. We'll say KH, Miss H.
Yeah, parents, teacher, very good people who can make a great influence in your life. Awesome. What about you, Elena?
Definitely, I'll have to say one of the teachers I had as a child, because she has taught me that anything is possible regardless of your blindness. And then 2 other friends I know, I'll just use first initials. So A, she is also a fellow podcaster, and she inspired me to continue with my passion. And F has also inspired me to continue with my passion of podcasting and to show me that anything is possible.
Very nice, definitely.
Well, I think I'm going to have to go with my mom, my daughter, and one in particular, previous colleague that I worked with who was all about slow down. And that was such great advice when you're teaching and working with kids, and just pace yourself, just slow down a little bit, patience and in the moment too, just kind of slow things down, because things can kind of escalate quickly sometimes with some of the students that I worked with.
Oh, yes, definitely. Especially working with little kids, you really have to slow down and be patient. For me, the 3 people who had influenced me thus far, my Braille teacher in China, my mom, who's now living with Jesus, she told me to always advocate for yourself. One person who really got me started into podcasting, his name is Jonathan Mosen. I enjoy hearing his New Zealand accent, and every time when his podcast is being released, I would drop everything and listen to his podcast first and foremost. He got me started in podcasting. Since he's blind, and every time when he podcasts, he demonstrated that everything is possible, including working in radio. After we got that out of the way, and we can get into our topic for today, which is motivation. For the past year, the world forced us to stay home because of COVID-19. I stayed at home and worked on my podcast. Beside that, I also learned how to use this recording software called Audacity. So what about the 3 of you? How had COVID-19 influenced you?
thanks to God, I have received both doses of the vaccination, and I never got the virus in real life myself. I'm forever thankful for that. However, it has impacted me because it has caused me a lot of great frustration. It has initially it disrupted our family's travel plans. It disrupted the places I was going to go in life. It affected our economy. It affected my brother's ability to find work quickly enough. So it's I've just been feeling over the past couple of years, and it's starting to catch up with me now. I'm feeling like I need to really start to get a move on and get out of the house more. And that's what I'm, as a matter of fact, going to do tomorrow morning very early. But, the virus is really, in the end, I'm feeling how much it's affected my motivation. I really am. Definitely.
Many of us actually have the same feelings because we're supposed to do this in the year of 2020, but our plan got messed up. Tokyo's supposed to have the Olympics, but due to the influenza, it was forced to do it this year.
It influenced me in the way that it's really had changed, especially travel plans for one, because I was planning on making another trip out to the Bahamas to an all-inclusive resort. But it's like with COVID, obviously that could not happen. So I've been doing a lot of hobbies and teaching myself a bunch of different things, like how to code using WordPress and other new things that I've never tried before, like knitting and crocheting and new hobbies that I have never knew that I could do.
Very nice. Yeah, I've tried coding with WordPress before. At that point, my tech skills wasn't meeting the requirement. I have to put that to a halt. How had COVID-19 influenced you, Wendy? Because I know in Canada is way better than us here in the United States.
At this point, in Ontario, we're in a stay-at-home order. We're in lockdown again. I do have one dose of the vaccine, but it's really been a struggle getting the vaccines here. So as many as people want to get the vaccine, we've had a shortage. So for me, I'm a brick and mortar teacher. So I teach in the building, and so obviously that has looked very different for us. We were off in January back, we do the pandemic pivot where we've gone from in-person to online to in-person, and now we're back online. So it has certainly changed in terms of work for me, and home life has changed too. Like Elana, I've dived back into some hobbies of crocheting and being able to spend more time with my children. They're teens and young adults. So there has been some positive of we're all home and we are all safe, and motivation for sure. I think the last time we were at a stay at home last year, coming out of it, I thought, boy, I had so much time and I should have got a lot more done when, when I was forced to stay home. But the next time going into lockdown again, somehow couldn't stay with that motivation. I think it's just a lot hanging over everybody.
Oh yes, definitely. In my sister's workplace, one person actually learned how to bake bread during the lockdown. We were fortunate to try out her work. It was a great thing that she actually learned, because the bread turned out to be great. And since you also talk about the virtual learning, oh my gosh, that is another story. I can handle virtual learning, of course. Sometimes the program set by our school district can be very challenging. What are your thoughts in virtual learning?
Well, being that I have been an online teacher for 5.5 years, I support it. I find that some students learn really well online, others not so much. But for me, I'm kind of a type of person who works really well by myself. I just go about my business. So for me, I'm completely in support of virtual learning. And I'm completely in support of the online economy. No, you didn't ask that. I just added that. But as far as the virtual learning goes, I think it's a really good way to live. I think it's our society now. So I support it.
Oh, great. Yeah, especially nowadays, technology plays an important part in our society. There's a need of not going to a physical office, and instead, we can all achieve it at home. Very nice.
So, for virtual learning for me, in the beginning, it was a bit of a challenge because it was a whole new adjustment process coming from being on campus in person to having to, come back home to learn. And when coming back home to learn, it just was a bit of a challenge because we were still working out the kinks with accessibility. Us students were not very familiar with Google platforms like the Google LMS system and other things relating to it. But overall, we did get to work it out. And I'm going on about 3 more weeks of being online, and then I'm done for until finals.
Oh, yes, definitely. Saying about accessibility, thanks to Freedom Scientific, they had offered a free license for people who don't have access to JAWS and Zoom Text or Fusion for 4 months from late March till August 31st. And oh my gosh, that has served a lot of people. Besides the virtual learning, of course, I have a lot of things to say about the virtual learning. How did your school implemented the code of conduct for virtual students?
My company X, I call it. I mean, there is a code of conduct, but it's been a company that's been around since 2012. I've been working there since 2015. So for me personally, very little has changed over the past 5.5 years.
I was at the Georgia Academy for the Blind for a week. On that week, we were told no one would like to see us if we present ourselves with full moon. Of course, many of you listeners know what's my impression.
So, definitely for my virtual sense of things, there's no really such thing as a dress code, as I can, sit on Zoom in my sweatpants and a t-shirt all I want. But yeah, either way, it's like it doesn't really matter. I just typically, like on Zoom, I just keep a photo of myself for the people who can see, so they have an idea of who I am, because even with video, it still causes my internet to have issues.
Oh yes, for sure. This is why before we start recording, I said video waste a lot of bandwidth.
Well, I don't think there's a dress code for virtual. I think the challenge that we're having is having kids with their cameras on. A number of our students have their avatar up there, but when you ask them a question, they're not actually there. So they're kind of joining in the meetings. We use Google Classroom and Google Meet. And so from the teacher's point of view, they're not sure if the students are understanding the information. They're not getting much feedback, which they're used to in the regular class or in brick and mortar. So our biggest challenge right now with virtual is engagement and attendance, having the kids there. Some of our, we had learning at home where we had teachers that did virtual all the time, maybe similar to what Erin does. But the teachers who chose, you could choose. And many teachers chose not to go virtual because they like the in the building kind of. And the same with the students. The students had the option to either go virtual or to attend in person. And so we tended to get the kids who really needed to attend in person, who maybe virtual wasn't their best mode of learning. But now that everybody is virtual, those students that benefit from being in the building, they're really struggling with it.
Oh yes, especially. I especially know what it's like to learn math as a virtual student. To you, what is the hardest subject to learn virtually?
Well, guys, for me, teachers are always students, no question, but I am not actively learning anything at the moment. Apart from doing my work and then doing my podcast, I'm not in the active role of student or learning mode at this particular moment. So I don't know. I would think sciences and STEM subjects would be pretty tough online virtually, but I've never studied them in person either, so I don't know.
Yeah, to agree with you, STEM subjects are hard to learn as a virtual student, especially when you're a blind student. The teachers have to touch your hand physically to show you where everything is at. What is the hardest subject to you, Elena, when doing virtual?
Definitely math because of accessibility.
Oh, yes, definitely. I have to agree with you because I have to do that for 6 months with the Perkins. What subject that's hard for your students, Wendy, when they're learning virtually?
Well, for some of my students with learning challenges, they're just not engaged in virtual learning. So I have some students that would have one-on-one assistance for autism, and so they won't attend to a screen. So what I did was I made up kind of learning packages for the parents and tried to educate them on some of the tasks that we were doing. Some of them are life skill kind of tasks to see how they could manage at home, but very difficult if you in an intensive program to have them learning virtually. As an aside, my son is in high school, and during virtual he had welding, robotics, and drama most recently, and all three of those were certainly a challenge to try and do virtually. Welding basically just did not happen, obviously.
Oh yes, drama and physical related work that involves you move around your body. Those can be hard to achieve without getting a proper equipment, such as a camera, the stand. So far, we've discussed things that we faced during COVID-19 pandemic, from virtual learning to hardest subject, especially for me, who's in high school, and Elena, who's also about to graduate. We all agreed that math is the hardest subject, and Wendy, you bring up acting and classes that require you to stand up and move around. I totally agree with all three of you. We're about to wrap up our discussion for today, and as a tradition, before I wrap up the conversation, I would always ask my listeners whether they have any advice to share with my listeners.
My advice is that you need to keep learning things, keep podcasting, and my advice is that it's really important to pick a hobby that you love. And I love being a podcaster and content creator. And I'll just say this now. I would just love it if Elena and Wendy, obviously recording 2 separate episodes, I would be honored if both of you would guest on my podcast. Know that both of you are always welcome at Aaron's Opinion too. That's my advice.
Thanks very much.
Very
Thank
nice.
you. I definitely have to say is that when it comes to being a blind student or just a blind person in general, especially during COVID, it's like everything is not the same as it used to be. There's the inaccessibility, especially in our society. And it's like, what I'd have to say to you all is keep moving forward. You can't dwell on the past. And this quote that has always lived by me, and it will especially help you all: honor the past, imagine the present, and live the future.
Very nice.
Oh, I love that.
That is well fitted for today's theme, because especially we talk about our goals 5 and 10 years from now.
I'm going to agree with the other two about continuing to learn and continuing to move forward. I'm ending one chapter of my teaching career, but I'm trying to learn new things. And so from this old gal, I would say keep learning. And if I was speaking to students, I would say absolutely continue to advocate for your needs, and trust that there are people there that want to help you. They maybe need a little guidance, but make a tribe, make a community.
Very nice. And love the advices. This is it for this edition of Michael's Weekly Perspective Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to send an email to me. That email address is munnmichael68@gmail.com. That's munnmichael68@gmail.com. Besides that, you can also call using the listener line, and that number is 404-923-0115. That's 404-923-0115. Thank you, Aaron, Elena, and Wendy for joining me today in the studio. I really appreciate it.